Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the George W. Norris Legislative Chamber for the 64th day of the 108th Legislature First Session. Our chaplain for today is Senator Aguilar. Please rise.
Please assume an attitude of prayer. Dear Lord Jesus, praise to you, God, for this great state and this great nation. Praise to you, Lord, for your steadfast love of all of us. We look to you, O Lord, for your guidance to lead wisdom on decisions and for your faithfulness to get us through the hard times. I pray for all who are in authority to remember to look to you for all these things. I pray we can act as one, not one party, race, or of one interest, but as one heart. Help us to not let the trends of social media abandon our morals. Help us to let our belief in you guide our thoughts and decisions. We ask all of this in your name. Amen.
I recognize Senator Brandt for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Please join me for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I call to order the 64th day of the 108th Legislature, First Session. Senators, please record your presence. Roll call. Mr. Clerk, please record.
There's a quorum present, Mr. President.
Thank you. Are there any corrections for the journal?
I have no corrections this morning.
Are there any messages, reports, or announcements?
I have none at this time, Mr. President.
While the legislature is in session and capable of transacting business, I propose to sign and do hereby sign LB 376E. Mr. Clerk, for items.
Mr. President, first item on the agenda, Legislative Bill 92, introduced by Senator Slama. It's a bill for an act relating to insurance, amend sections 44, 1993 eliminates the requirement that an annual review of the title insurance agent's practices by a title insurer must be on site, and repeals the original section. Bill was read for the first time on January 6th of this year and referred to the Banking, Commerce, and Insurance Committee. That committee placed the bill on general file with committee amendments. There are other amendments as well, Mr. President.
Senator Slama, you are recognized to open on LB 92.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues, and happy Banking, Commerce, and Insurance Committee Day. It's the best day of the year. We're going to talk about some really wonderful bills. We've got 15 bills we're going to handle today with the committee Christmas tree, so please pay attention. If you do have a bill that is going to be up in the committee Christmas tree, I will be asking you a question about your bill on the mic, so please stay tuned and around for that. But our baseline bill today is LB 92. This bill would amend Sections 44, 1993, a law that identifies the duties that title insurers have when utilizing the services of title insurance agents. Currently under the statute, one of those duties is to at least annually conduct an on-site review of the underwriting, claims, and escrow practices of the title insurance agents that they contract with. Specifically, this bill would remove the requirement that this review be on-site. Removal of the on-site requirement recognizes the digital environment that is becoming more common in all industries, to include the title insurance industry, where remote work and inspections are more common and used as an increased cost and time savings measure for employers. Again, I would appreciate your support for this important bill. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Slama. As the clerk referred, there are amendments from the Banking Committee, and Senator Slama to open on the amendments.
Thank you, Mr. President. AM 484 and our subsequent floor amendment contains the provisions of two banking, commerce, and insurance priority bills, LB 92 and 214, along with bills that were amended into those bills with committee amendments, AM 484. LB 145, 383, 437, 779, and LB 392, and AM 398, LB 669, and 674. AM 1364 also includes 6 other bills that were passed out of the committee, all with 8-0 votes. LB 536, 68, 587, 93, 3, and 207. Again, all of these bills advance from committee 8-0 and represent bipartisan, good governance, no controversy legislation. So with that, we'll start going through what all of these bills are. LB 92 was introduced by me and is included in Section 56 in AM 1364, which will be coming up next. This bill would amend Section 44, 1993, a law that identifies the duties that oh, we've already been through that one. My apologies. Next up is LB 145, which was introduced by Senator Bostar. Senator Bostar, would you be willing to yield for a question?
Senator Bostar, would you yield to a question?
Absolutely.
Senator Bostar, would you be willing to take a brief moment just to tell us what LB 145 is all about?
Yes, absolutely. I will try to be as brief as I can. There are several moving parts to this. So just for background, currently, women 35 to 40 are entitled to one baseline mammogram. Women 40 to 49 are entitled to one mammogram every 2 years or more frequently based on the patient's physician's recommendation. And women 50 or older are entitled to one mammogram each year. LB 145 changes this up a bit. Women 35 to 40 are still entitled to one baseline mammogram. Women under 40 are entitled to at least one mammogram each year, and additional mammograms if necessary, if based on the National Comprehensive Cancer Network guidelines, breast cancer screening and diagnosis, and the recommendation of the women's healthcare provider, they have an increased risk of breast cancer due to a family or personal history of breast cancer or prior atypical breast biopsy, positive genetic testing, or heterogeneous or dense breast tissue based on breast imaging, Women 40 and over are entitled to 1 mammogram every year. Women 40 and over are entitled to 1 digital breast tomosynthesis each year, if based on the National Comprehensive Cancer Network guidelines for breast cancer screening and diagnosis and the recommendation of the women's healthcare provider, have an increased risk of breast cancer due to a family or personal history of breast cancer or atypical breast biopsy, positive genetic testing, or heterogeneous or dense breast tissue based on breast imaging. Women 40 and over are entitled to 1 bilateral whole breast ultrasound each year, if based on the National Comprehensive Cancer Network guidelines for breast cancer screening and diagnosis, and the recommendation that women's healthcare provider have an increased risk of breast cancer due to a family or personal history of breast cancer or prior atypical breast biopsy, positive genetic testing, or heterogeneous or dense breast tissue based on breast imaging. Women 40 and over are entitled to 1 diagnostic magnetic resonance imaging each year, if based on the National Comprehensive Cancer Network guidelines for breast cancer screening and diagnosis and the recommendation of the women's healthcare provider, have an increased risk of breast cancer due to a family or personal history of breast cancer or prior atypical breast biopsy, positive genetic testing, or a history of chest radiation. Women 40 and over are entitled to 1 diagnostic magnetic resonance imaging each year, if based on the National Standard Risk Models or the National Comprehensive Cancer Network guidelines for breast cancer screening and diagnosis, has an increased risk of breast cancer or heterogeneous or dense breast tissue. With the exception of diagnostic medical magnetic resonance imaging for women based on heterogeneous or dense breast tissue, none of the procedures shall be subject to the application of deductible, co-insurance, co-payment, or other cost-sharing requirements contained in the policy or health benefit plan for such services.
Thank you, Senator Bostar. Would you say it's fair to say that this bill would save lives in the state of Nebraska?
I think it'll save a lot of lives in the state of Nebraska.
Fantastic. Thank you, Senator Bostar. Don't go too far away. Your bill LB 383 is up next, and I think that's another bill that'll save a lot of lives in the state of Nebraska.
Thank you. Again, trying to get through some of these quickly. I'll be happy to answer questions if anyone has them. LB 383 changes provisions relating to the insurance coverage of screenings for colorectal cancer. There are a number of screening tests that are available for identifying risk of colorectal cancer, and most of those that are non-colonoscopies require a follow-up colonoscopy to be undertaken in order to verify those non-colonoscopy test results. Currently, the follow-up colonoscopy is treated as a diagnostic exam and is therefore subject to cost-sharing provisions, co-payment, co-insurance, et cetera. Under LB 383, insurers are required to cover screening colonoscopies, including those performed as a result of a positive non-colonoscopy preventive screening test as approved by the United States Preventive Services Task Force, without any cost-sharing provisions whatsoever.
Fantastic. Thank you, Senator Bostar. Senator Ballard, would you be willing to yield to a question?
Senator Ballard, will you yield?
Absolutely.
Senator Ballard, could you please tell us a little bit about LB 437?
Yeah, thank you, Senator Slama. LB 437 was a technical change brought to me by the Department of Insurance and is an extremely simple bill. Currently, business entity license have to be renewed on April 30th of each year. This LB 437 would change that to even years. So under current Insurance Producer Licensing Act, the insurance producers must obtain 2 licenses, an individual insurance provider license and a business entity license. The business entity license expires annually, while the individual license expires biannually, with individuals born in even-numbered years renewing their license at the end of their birth month in the even-numbered years, and individuals born in odd-number years renewing their license in the end of their birth month in odd-number years. The current renewal schedule in both licenses needlessly complicate the licensing process and can easily lead to confusion among individuals and the department. LB 437 streamlines the process of these individuals and align the renewal schedule, cutting red tape.
Thank you, Senator Ballard. Senator Bostar, I'm glad you didn't leave the floor. Would you be willing to tell us about your bill, LB 779?
Senator Bostar, will you yield to a question?
Of course. And thank you for the opportunity. LB 779 creates a new statute that would cap the price of insulin for insured Nebraskans at $35 for a 30-day supply. The bill provides specifically for a statute that would specify that any individual or group sickness or accident insurance policy or subscriber contract delivered, issued for delivery, or renewed in this state, and any hospital, medical, or surgical expense incurred policy, except for policies that provide coverage for a specified disease or other limited benefit coverage, and any self-funded employee benefit plan to the extent not preempted by federal law, which provides reimbursement for prescription insulin drugs, shall limit the total amount that a covered individual is required to pay for a covered prescription insulin drug to a maximum of $35 per 30-day supply of insulin, regardless of the amount needed. Each covered prescription insulin drug on the policies, contracts, or plans, this would apply to the covered prescription insulin drug that the insurance plan refers to as the preferred insulin option. So generally generic insulin options aren't really a thing that's available broadly in the market. So this is for preferred rate insulin, and it would cap it at $35 per 30-day supply, regardless of the quantity needed under the prescription.
Thank you, Senator Bostar. Senator Ballard, you will be up next on my next turn up. It should be an open on an amendment that's coming up next. But just so everybody knows, a packet with the description of every bill, who testified for, who testified against, will be coming around. The pages will be handing it out briefly. But thank you all so much for your consideration, and thank you to everybody who has worked with me in putting this Christmas tree together. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Slama. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, for what purpose do you rise?
To divide the question.
Could you please approach, and Senator Slama as well? It's the ruling of the chair that the amendment is divisible. Mr. Clerk, for an explanation.
Mr. President, the first division, FA 56, will contain the contents of Legislative Bill 145, FA 56.
Senator Slama, you're recognized to open on FA 56.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll be very brief. LB 145 was described by Senator Bostar. That is the requirement that breast cancer screenings be covered. It's a wonderful bill. Grateful it's in there. And I'd encourage your green vote. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Slama. Senator Erdman, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning. I was wondering if Senator Slama would yield to a question.
Senator Slama, would you yield to a question?
Of course I will.
Senator Slama, I see FA 56 is up and it's talking about Senator Bostar's bill, but I have a question about the removal of the in-person examination of the title insurance people.
Sure.
Is this implemented to save money for those who do the examination? What is the purpose of that besides the digital information that can be had without going there?
Absolutely. Let me access my notes here. But yes, it is meant to streamline that inspection process. I think you're talking about LB 92 here.
That's correct.
When we're talking about the title insurance industry, the overwhelming majority of title insurers are working remotely. So this just simply reflects the fact that most are not working in a traditional office setting.
Okay. Who does the inspection? Is it a state inspection or who does that?
Department of Insurance.
Department of Insurance?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so thank you for answering that. I have a few comments about title
Absolutely.
insurance. We, in the real estate business in Western Nebraska, have had several instances with title insurance. And I think title insurance is very similar to all other insurances. It's only as good as your agent. And we've had incidents where we've had a claim that we nearly have to take them to court to get them to pay or do what they were instructed to do when we hired them to analyze the title. So I don't know whether this is going to be helpful in that regard or not, but there are issues with title insurance that people think that they really have something when they have title insurance, and it's better than nothing. And that's about all I can say about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Erdman. Mr. Clerk, for an amendment.
Mr. President, Senator Slama would amend the first division with AM 1364.
Senator Slama, you're recognized to open on AM 1364.
Thank you, Mr. President. AM 1364 just builds on our Christmas tree with the bills that I've already introduced. Just briefly to respond to Senator Erdman before I yield to Senator Ballard for a question. Just during COVID, it was identified under LB 92 that in-person inspections weren't necessary and everything could be done digitally. You're examining the same documents, the same issues with each company. There's no travel and it saves money to Nebraska taxpayers as well, ensuring that we still have strong oversight of our title insurers. And with that, I'll see if Senator Ballard will yield to a question.
Senator Ballard, will you yield?
Yes.
Senator Ballard, LB 392 is in AM 1364. Would you mind telling us a little bit about it?
Yeah. LB 392 is a bill that allows employers, employer organizations, or trustees of employment associations sponsoring a health benefit plan to consent to electronic document delivery on behalf of their representative employees. Currently, when an individual is enrolled in a health insurance plan provided by their employer, all related documents to the insurance plan gets mailed to their employees, unless the employee specifically requested the documents electronically. LB 392 would allow employers to save employees needless complicated step, cutting red tape, making employee access to their health insurance information easier.
Thank you, Senator Ballard. Now we're on to a couple of sections that include bills that I've introduced. Sections 66 and 65 of AM 1364 contain my provisions of LB 536. I was asked to introduce LB 536 by the Nebraska Insurance Federation. LB 536 updates two provisions of the Insurers Investment Act, an act whose purposes, as stated in Nebraska Revised Statute 445103, to protect and further the interests of policyholders, claimants, creditors, and the general public by establishing standards, requirements, and limitations for the investments of insurers doing business in this state. Such standards, requirements, and limitations are intended to promote solvency, investment yield and growth, investment diversification, investment value stability, and liquidity to meet business needs. So in LB 536, we're amending these provisions related to an insurer's investment in both preferred stock and common stock by eliminating retained earnings qualifications for both types of investments. As corporate practices have changed, retained earnings are not necessarily a good indication of whether or not the corporation stock is a sound investment. This change will match the state of law in most other jurisdictions and will provide domestic insurers more flexibility. We'll save LB 68 for later on. Senator Wishart, would you yield to a question?
Senator Wishart, will you yield to a question?
Yes, I'd be happy to.
Wonderful. LB 587 is also included in AM 1364. Would you mind telling us about it?
Yes, absolutely. So LB 587 is a bill to create an InsurTech regulatory sandbox program in Nebraska. A sandbox is a regulatory approach typically summarized in writing and published that allows live, time-bound testing of innovations under a regulator's oversight. The first regulatory sandbox was launched in 2015 in the UK and generated great interest from regulators and innovators around the world. Since then, regulatory sandboxes have been launched in 12 US states and numerous countries. States like Arizona, Utah, Wyoming, and South Dakota are welcoming more firms, entrepreneurs, and investment by offering these regulatory sandboxes. So following the hearing on LB 587, I worked with industry representatives to add additional disclosure language, increase the fee to cover administrative costs, and add a sunset of 10 years as a backdrop of future legislators feel this program isn't performing as it should. Colleagues, the benefits of a regulatory sandbox outweigh any distant risk. This is an opportunity for businesses and startups to collaborate with the Department of Insurance to create smart regulation, because oftentimes regulation is not able to keep up with the pace of innovation. Nebraska will benefit from this increased access to funding by reducing regulatory uncertainty and information asymmetries between firms and investors. And Nebraska consumers will also benefit through this approach because they'll have better access to services at a potentially lower cost. LB 587 received no opposition at the hearing and was voted out of committee unanimously. I want to thank Senator and Chairwoman Slama for working with me to include this bill in LB 992. And I also want to thank the Platt Institute for their continued leadership on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Wishart. This is something that's been worked on for years by you, so I'm very grateful for your leadership in implementing smart regulations that really allow growth in our insurance industry in the state of Nebraska. Senator Sanders, would you be willing to yield to a question?
Senator Sanders, will you yield to a question?
Yes.
Senator Sanders, could you please tell us a little bit about LB3, which is also in the Christmas tree?
Yes, thank you, Senator Slama. This should not take long. AM 1364 contains my bill, LB3. The body has actually already been discussed, LB3 on general file, and on February 16th, it passed to ENR initial on a 35-0 vote. As a brief summary, this is a cleanup bill that sets a deadline on the process provided in last year's LB 1165 for political subdivisions with bonding elections. The bill ensures a manageable timeline for county assessors to build tax districts. This bill passed the Banking Committee on January 31st on an 8-0 vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Sanders. Senator Von Gilleren, would you be willing to yield for a question?
Senator Von Gilleren, will you yield to a question?
Yes, I will.
Thank you, Senator Von Gilleren. LB 207 is also included in the Christmas tree. Would you like to tell us a little bit about it?
Sure, very quickly. In LB 207, again, as Senator Sanders mentioned, 207 has also been shared on the floor previously. 207 allows for the sale of a trust property under the Nebraska Trust Deeds Act to occur at a public building where county offices are located within the county in which the property is to be sold or some part thereof is situated. There's been some situations in the past where deed of sales have occurred at places other than the courthouse, and this is just a simple cleaning up of the language around that so that everybody understands where to show up on the day of a property sale. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Von Gilleren. Senator Ballard, would you yield for a question?
Senator Ballard, will you yield to a question?
All right. In the interest of time, we'll have him go next. So stay tuned, Senator Ballard. Senator Jacobson, would you yield for a question?
Senator Jacobson, would you yield for a question?
Yes, I would. Thank you.
Senator Jacobson, LB 674 is included in the Christmas tree as well. Would you be willing to tell us a little bit about it?
Absolutely. LB 674, first of all, everybody gets a little nervous when they start seeing something that says digital currency and start thinking Bitcoin and, oh my God, are we doing Bitcoin? Let me just remind everyone, I'm a commercial banker. I'm not a big Bitcoin fan. In fact, I'm probably the opposite of a Bitcoin fan. This bill is real clear. It's providing the tools that the Department of Banking and Insurance needs to be able to regulate what's out there in the Nebraska Financial Innovation Act today. So this act was approved a couple of years ago, and this is really language in the bill that's tightening up the regulation and providing the Department of Banking to better regulate those institutions, that are out there. And I would tell you that right now there's one that I'm aware of in Nebraska And so this is really cleanup language. There's a lot of pieces to it. It's changing some things with regard to granting authority and talking about a charter. It's requiring when they can, whether they have to have an executive officer in the state of Nebraska to be able to make decisions. It also provides for very swift movement for them to revoke a charter. It also lays out the requirements in terms of pledging to be able to make sure that they're fully covered, any of the digital assets that they're holding. So that's what that's doing. It's a regulatory measure. That's what that piece of the bill is about. So just understand, as a banker, I'm concerned about it. So I'm making sure we got this in there. So it's a good part of the bill.
Thank you, Senator Jacobson. Senator Ballard, would you yield for a question?
Senator Ballard, will you yield for a question?
Of course.
Senator Ballard, would you tell us a little bit about LB 669?
Yes, I will be extremely brief. LB 669 is a bill designed to provide powers for the Director of Banking and Finance to prescribe conditions on banks, trust companies, credit unions, building and loan associations, saving and loan association, and digital asset depositories and their holding companies. As part of any written order, decisions and determinations required to be made pursuant to the Nebraska Banking Act, the Credit Union Act, and the Nebraska Finance Innovation Act.
Thank you, Senator Ballard. And I will continue with my remaining bills on AM 1364 on my next turn at the mic. Thank you all so much for your consideration on LB 92.
Thank you, Senator Slama. Senator Jacobson, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I'm going to yield my time to Senator Slama so she can continue down this path.
Senator Slama, you have 4 minutes, 53 seconds.
Thank you very much, Senator Jacobson. LB 68 is the next bill that's included in AM 1364. LB 68 was introduced by me and is included in sections 57 through 62 in AM 1364. LB 68 would increase the amount of liability coverage that must be carried by physicians, certified registered nurse anesthetists, and hospitals in order to qualify for the excess liability fund coverage under the Nebraska Hospital Medical Liability Act. Since 1976, Nebraska has benefited from the excess liability fund through lowered liability premiums for qualified healthcare providers, improved availability and affordability of healthcare, and a reliable payout to injured patients when a provider exhausts the limits of their liability insurance. So this is how the excess liability fund works. First, only physicians, certified nurse anesthetists, and hospitals may qualify for coverage under the fund. In order to qualify, the provider must file proof of liability coverage with the Department of Insurance. Currently, that coverage must have a liability limit of $500,000 per occurrence for all providers and an aggregate annual limit of $1 million for physicians and CRNAs and $3 million for hospitals. Second, the provider must pay a surcharge into the excess liability fund. This is what funds the excess liability fund. The surcharge is set annually by the Department of Insurance, and it's a percentage of the provider's annual insurance premium. The surcharge is capped by statute at 50% of the provider's annual premium. When a provider is qualified under the fund, their liability is limited to $500,000 per occurrence, which means it is covered by their policy limits. Any judgments or settlements over that amount are covered by the fund up to the statutory cap of $2.25 million. LB 68 would increase the amount of coverage required to qualify under the fund to $1 million per occurrence and $3 million aggregate for all qualified providers, hospitals, physicians, and CRNAs. This has the effect of both bringing additional surcharges into the fund because it would be based on a higher premium, as well as reducing the risk to the fund because only amounts over $1 million will be paid out of the fund. It is important that Nebraska remain vigilant in maintaining a healthy excess liability fund. The underlying coverage requirements have not been increased since 2004, and one of the indicators that alarms me is that the average actuarially indicated surcharge over the last 5 years is 67.5%, meaning the fund has been underfunded for a number of years up against a statutory cap of 50%. AM 371 and 794 are minor amendments that we've added to LB 68. It clarifies that the fund is not responsible for paying the first dollar or the first $1 million on a claim in the event of a qualified provider exhausts their annual aggregate limit of $3 million. This really just clarifies current law, but we thought it would be a good idea to avoid any uncertainty going forward. We also changed the operative date from January 2024 to January 2025, just to give our hospitals the time they need to make sure this can be in place. LB 93 is another bill in AM 1364, is introduced by me, and it's sections 51, 52, 53, and 63. LB 93 would amend Nebraska Revised Statutes 44, 31902, 31903, 06, and 08. These statutes require mandatory security deposits to be made to the Department of Insurance by domestic insurers, non-exempt domestic assessment associations, foreign insurers, and assessment associations, and insurers dealing in legal expense insurance. Under current law, those named categories of insurers can only name policyholders as beneficiaries. Thank you, Mr. President. Beneficiaries of mandatory security deposits. LB 67 would make it so those insurers could name either just policyholders or both policyholders and creditors as the beneficiaries of mandatory security deposits. And I will revisit the last bill, LB 214, in my next turn on the mic. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Slama. Senator Decay has guests in the North Balcony, line workers from Lincoln Electric and Omaha Public Power District. Please stand and be recognized by your Nebraska Legislature. Senator Dungan, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I rise today in support of LB 92 as well as FA 56 and AM 1364. I wanted to get into a little more detail about some of the things that are in here and why I support them. I know that these Christmas tree bills can be a little bit daunting from time to time. I will get on the mic again and kind of talk about what some of the benefits of these are, but for now I wanted to go ahead and yield the remainder of my time to Senator Slama, if she'll take it, to continue introing the bill.
Thank you so much, Senator Dungan. I appreciate it tremendously. We have one bill left in this Christmas tree, so stick with me here. LB 214 is our banking cleanup bill for this year. Every year we have to pass a banking bill to remain in federal compliance. We have to change some dates that are required by federal law. So LB 214 is a very critical piece of AM 1364. LB 214 was introduced by me and is included in the following sections within AM 1364. Sections 4 through 11, 13 through 18, 50, 67 through 76, and 78. LB 214 is a bill that would update a number of banking and other financial institution-related statutes. So I will briefly break the bill's nature down to 5 categories. First, the bill provides for the annual reenactment of the Depository Financial Institutions wildcard statutes to provide equal rights, powers, privileges, benefits, and immunities for state-chartered banks, savings and loan companies, and credit unions with their respective federal counterparts. Due to state constitutional restrictions, these statutes are amended annually. Second, the bill would amend a number of state laws to update cross-reference federal statutes and regulations so as to refer these statutes and regulations as they existed on January 1st, 2023. Currently, these statutes have a reference date of January 1st, 2022. That is a problem if you're going to stay in compliance with federal law. Third, the bill would amend 2 statutes within the loan broker statutes. This would be done in order to remove obsolete language related to the requirements that loan brokers are to include their electronic mail, internet addresses within the disclosure statements, and loan brokerage agreements given to customers. The effect of the amendments will make the requirements mandatory. Fourth, the bill would amend sections 45, 735 of the Residential Mortgage Licensing Act to provide that the department may authorize and regulate remote work arrangements for mortgage loan originators and other agents and employees of licensed mortgage bankers, registrants, and installment loan companies. Fifth, and lastly, the bill would make certain amendments to the Nebraska Installment Loan Act to define the term consumer and loan within section 45.1002 and repeals subsection 3 of the statute, which will be unnecessary with the adoption of those added definitions. Amend section 45.1003 to provide that a person who markets, own in whole or in part, holds, acquires, services, or otherwise participates in consumer loans made by a financial institution must be licensed under the Act. Importantly, financial institutions are and will continue to be exempt from licensing under the Act. amend sections 45-1006 to provide that the director of the department may waive the hearing requirements for an applicant who does not originate loans under this act. And it's important to note that this section of the bill does not apply to our car dealerships in the state of Nebraska. Is a question raised during the hearing. We've had some great discussions between the Department of Banking and our car dealers to ensure that this section of the bill will absolutely not apply to them. AM 81 was passed in committee, and it made a small change to LB 214 by removing and replacing language in the bill stating what loans would be subject to the Nebraska Installment Loan Act and who would be required to be licensed under the act. AM 81 was based on a compromise between the Nebraska Bankers Association and the Nebraska Department of Banking and Finance.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. Right on time. That is all of the bills in AM 1364 that make up the Christmas tree for the Banking, Commerce, and Insurance Committee this year. There are 15 bills. They're good governance, low controversy bills that will update our statutes to where they need to be, save lives by ensuring women have access to breast cancer screenings and that all people have access to colorectal cancer screenings when they need it. We also cap insulin costs. This is really a bill where everybody should be able to find something they like in it, and it represents a wonderful grouping of bills, and I'm so grateful to Speaker Arch for allowing us to put this Christmas tree together to make sure that these low controversy bills can get across the finish line this year. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Slama. Senator Jacobson, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I was prepared to yield more time to Senator Slama, but she finished up, so she's more efficient than I thought she was. I do want to take just a minute to thank Chair Slama for her leadership in the Banking, Commerce, and Insurance Committee this year. I had the opportunity to serve as vice chair of the committee this year and the lone banker on the committee, but I will have to say that I'm very impressed with those members of this particular committee. It was a great group to work with. I think everyone really worked hard to try to come to a consensus and to try to get good legislation to the floor. And I think this Christmas tree bill certainly depicts that. These are very important updates. They can become very, very technical at times, but I think we had the right mix of people on this committee to make really good decisions, have very good discussion in our exec committees, and so I'm really pleased with the result. I would encourage everyone to get behind this bill and pass this bill in its entirety. I also want to take just a minute to maybe expand a little bit on Senator Erdman's question as it relates to title companies and being able to remotely examine them. The Department of Insurance, because of COVID, we really learned a lot about how do we do things remotely. So not only were there a lot of remote exams by the state banking department, but there are also a lot of remote exams by the Department of Insurance as well when it came to examining title companies. And we need to keep in mind that title insurance, as a banker, we use title insurance extensively because what happens is when a property is purchased, we request a title insurance policy where that title is searched. They confirm that the title is clean. They let us know what liens might be out there and what we need to pay off in order to get clear title. They provide a very important role in this process. And when they issue that policy, although that policy is issued for the initial purchase price, and of course over time that value goes down, or basically the value goes up and the amount of the policy doesn't rise, but nonetheless there is an insurance company that stands behind those policies, where in the old days you used to extend abstracts, which means that an abstractor would have to go look at what liens were filed, and then you'd have an attorney review it, and you really didn't have any coverage behind you at all. So what the Department of Insurance does when they do these audits is they're going out there and ensuring that the records are correct in these title companies. And so with most of this now going digital, they're able to review that digitally. A lot of banks now have their loan files that are in digital form. So Department of Banking is able to go out and do banking examinations, many cases remotely, because they're reviewing those loan files from a remote position from a digital standpoint. So a lot of what we're doing is still trying to keep up with modernization without compromising safety, and providing for more efficiency and cost savings. And so that was a lot of the focus and a lot of things that were done this year. And I just want to remind you again, as it relates to the digital assets, the focus there was truly to be able to provide the Department of Banking greater control, greater ability to act on what has already been approved. I'm very comfortable with what we ultimately agreed upon. I think it takes us significantly ahead of the pack in terms of where we need to be. We need to remember today that you can have digital asset companies from outside the state that can come into Nebraska today. That part of the bill also provides for better regulation of those out-of-state branches that are coming into Nebraska today. There aren't a lot of them, but that will grow over time. And so I feel very, very good about the package. I feel very good about all the input from all the members. And again, I sincerely appreciate the work of everyone on the Banking, Commerce, and Insurance Committee for their work. It was a job well done, and let's get this to the finish line. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Jacobson. Senator Albright has guests in the north balcony. Fourth graders from Cardinal Elementary, South Sioux City. Please stand and be recognized by your Nebraska Legislature. Senator Dungan, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm glad the fourth graders could be here for our riveting conversation about banking and insurance. It's really exciting for them today. I want to rise again in support of LB 92 as well as the various amendments and join the chorus of people thanking the work of the committee chair as well as a lot of the individuals who were involved in this. As I said on the first time on the mic, I think a lot of times these Christmas tree bills can be daunting to folks who weren't a part of the committee. Certainly they have been to me as we've gone through a number of these other packages and heard about some of the transportation and telecommunications or general affairs. And so I do oftentimes rely on the advice or counsel of folks who were in those committees to kind of advise me a little bit more about what was in these bills and the need or the benefit of them. I guess I rise to speak to any of my colleagues who have concerns or questions about this package. I absolutely do think that the bills that are contained in LB 92 as well as the various amendments that are being added on here on the floor are either good governance bills, things that are sort of cleanups that we're adjusting the language to, or are bills that are non-contentious and represent, frankly, months and months and months of work to get to a place where the bills are not contentious and we have all of the stakeholders involved in trying to pass these pieces of legislation that frankly help people. Whether we're talking about insurance cleanups or regulatory changes or things like insulin or breast cancer screening, I believe that all of the things contained in this Christmas tree are legitimately going to benefit the people in Nebraska. I joked earlier a little bit about how banking and insurance can be somewhat dry from time to time, but we do occasionally have bills that we hear in the committee that do kind of pull at the heartstrings and get to the core of what we're here to do, which is help Nebraskans. Senator Bostar's bill as it pertains to the breast cancer screening and sort of the details in that was one such hearing. We heard hours, it felt like, legitimately of testimony from people telling us their stories, how they've been personally affected by breast cancer, how loved ones have been affected by breast cancer. And it was incredibly moving to hear from them, not just the issues they've dealt with, but also some of the issues they've run into trying to get screening and how preventative care would have potentially not just made things easier for them, but also in some situations saved lives. And so, the fact that we have that as a component of this, I think represents a big step forward as a state. Represents a big step forward in trying to actually help people do that preventative care. And I'm very thankful for the work of not just some of the other senators on the committee, but also our friends in the insurance industry who understand the issues surrounding that and really did come to the table and work with a number of folks to get a compromise here or a bill that was actually going to do something that I think benefited everyone. So that was one note I wanted to make. In addition to that, I wanted to speak briefly about some of the things that I think Senator Jacobson and Senator Erdman were talking about. LB 92 and a number of these other bills, I think really do seek to update our statutes pertaining to what can be done remotely, what can be done digitally, and what has to be done in person. We saw, obviously, during the pandemic, there were a number of things that changed, working remote, doing things digitally. And what it seems like we've been able to see, and I'm speaking now from just talking to folks within the insurance department and the industry, is that there's a number of things that we can do more efficiently if we allow for a little bit more flexibility. And when the director came in and spoke to us about a number of these, or spoke in favor of these modifications, it really seemed to me that these are just good governance bills that allow the department to do their job more efficiently, which is something we should always be in favor of, and frankly, a little bit easier for folks.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. And so LB 92 and LB 392, I believe, were two that represented those kind of modifications. Senator Von Gillern's bill with regards to where the actual sale can take place is yet another good example of that, making sure that we can do things a little bit more efficiently, a little bit easier. I just felt like that made sense, and it was something that I absolutely supported. I wanted to talk a little bit more about why I supported the sandbox legislation that Senator Wishart introed for us earlier, but I know I'm running a little bit short on time. I might punch back in and give a little bit more context to that. But generally, I wanted to speak to my colleagues. I understand these Christmas trees can be daunting, but this one does represent a lot of really good faith effort to get some good governance bills put together. And I do think that passage of LB 92 is going to help Nebraska. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Dungan. Senator Conrad, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning, colleagues. I rise in support of LB 92 and its component parts, and to add my voice to the chorus of my colleagues this morning, I wanted to particularly highlight and thank the committee for their work in regards to the measures that advance critical women's health opportunities by updating our laws to ensure that our practices and insurance policies mirror best practices in terms of the information put forward by leading healthcare experts in the state, and some of the key components that ensure that we can utilize the best technology available to ensure that women have access to diagnostic opportunities that can help to detect breast cancer for a host of different reasons, but including earlier, which improves, of course, access and opportunities for treatment and survival. I do want to point out to the body's attention and for the record that there is a host of leading healthcare voices in the state that were supporting this measure: the Nebraska Nurses Association, the Nebraska Medical Association, the Nebraska Hospital Association, a host of insurance interests and healthcare providers and individuals as well. And I just want to reaffirm how important it is to take into account the guidance from our leading healthcare professionals about best practices in our healthcare policy, whether that's in LB 92 or other measures before the body. Additionally, I wanted to give voice to a host of messages that my office has received, and I'm sure many of your offices have received as well, from breast cancer survivors who really wanted us to take a hard look at this measure, to work together to figure out how to advance it because of the life-saving aspects that would improve health outcomes for Nebraskans. And I want to thank those Nebraskans for sharing deeply personal stories about their health journey and why that's so important to move these measures forward. I really think that some of the best policy making comes from a combination of storytelling on personal lived experiences and data, information, medicine, and science in regards to healthcare policy from leading healthcare professionals as well. And you can really see that marriage of those key ingredients for sound policy making in this breast cancer measure. And I definitely am going to hit my light more because I would like to talk additionally about important efforts in this committee package and the component parts in regards to affordability and accessibility for insulin treatments and the colorectal care components as well, in addition to some of the other measures that other senators have already covered. But I wanted to thank the committee for their hard work. I wanted to thank Senator Bostar for bringing forward this critical women's health measure. And I wanted to reaffirm to the body how important it is to honor the voices of our second house that have been asking us to update our policies and practices to ensure we take into account medical best practices and changes in technology to improve health outcomes. And that's definitely a big part of why I'm supporting this measure and encourage others to do the same. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Conrad. Mr. Clerk, for items.
Mr. President, one thing quickly. Bills read this morning were presented to the governor on April 18, 2023 at 9:18 a.m. That's all I have this time.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're next in the queue.
Thank you, Mr. President. Trying to follow along. As I said, I think the first day of session to Senator Slama, I don't get banking. So I've been trying to follow along, and the committee staff has done an amazing job with a 25-page synopsis, 26-page synopsis of this amendment that I very much appreciate. I always like to acknowledge that our committee staff does most of the work. And so it's good to give them a lot of the credit when we can. And I'm very grateful. This is a very, very comprehensive amendment and a very comprehensive committee summary, which I believe they are handing out on the floor now from Senator Slama. So everyone can follow along. So this bill is, the floor amendment has LB 92 and 214, and then it has 145, 383, 437, 779, and 392. And then it also has 669, 674, 536, 68, 587, 93, 3, and 207. I lost track. That's a lot. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. 15. So definitely not our biggest tree so far. It might be big enough for the Durham in Omaha, but not for Rockefeller Center. So maybe by the end of the day, we'll have enough bills on it for Rockefeller Center. So LB 92 would amend statute relating to the annual review of title insurance agents, provided section by section below, amends section 44-1993 in order to eliminate the requirement that an annual review of a title insurance agent's practices by a title insurer be on site. Repeals statutes amended. And LB 144, as amended by AM 354, change provisions relating to coverage for screening, mammography, and breast examinations. This is what Senator Bostar was talking about. That I did kind of follow, personal experience and personal interest in changes to mammograms. It decreases the age requirement for annual mammograms from 50 years of age to 40 years of age. Seems like a really good and important change. Adds language stating that any individual or group sickness and accident insurance policy or health benefit plan that provides coverage for screening mammography shall provide coverage for diagnostic imaging or mammography diagnostics, ultrasound, and supplemental breast screening. Repeals the original section being amended. Okay, and then LB 415 would and LB, or the AM would amend it as follow: remove subsection 1 added with LB 145 that provided new definitions for the statute, clarifies ultrasound as meaning bilateral whole breast ultrasound, and diagnostic imaging as meaning diagnostic magnetic resonance imaging, and adds digital breast, I don't know this word, tomosynthesis, as a covered service under the statute. Adds a condition stating that the identified increased risk of breast cancer must be based upon the National Comprehensive Cancer Network Guidelines for Breast Cancer Screening and Diagnostic version 1.2022. And in the case of subsection 1.7 of this section, must be based upon national standard risk models or the National Comprehensive Cancer Network Guidelines for Breast Cancer Screening and Diagnostic, without reference to a specific version. Adds language that specifies what type of risk factor, parentheses, family or personal history, breast biopsy, etc., and parentheses, is required for access to different types of screenings under the statute. Limits the application of deductibles or co-payments under the statute to diagnostic magnetic resonance imaging for a woman based on...
That's your time, Senator.
Oh.
You're next in the queue, Senator Michaela Cavanaugh.
Thank you. I don't know that I got a 1-minute warning, but I will just, once I'm out of the queue, I'll get back in the queue for my third time. Okay, so I should have done that the last time and I forgot. Okay, remove subsection, wait, that did that. Okay, removes language stating that the section does not apply if covered individuals are provided an ongoing screening mammography program, which at a minimum meets the requirements of this section as a separate benefit. Restores the stricken language of subsection 3 that included clarification and definitions of terms used in the statute. Adds a new section to LB 145 that identifies the operative date as January 1, 2024. Oral testimony. Proponents, Senator Elliott Bostar, Mary Jane Glade, healthcare provider, Brandy Preston, Kim Danielson, Margaret Wapple, Nebraska Hospital Association, Danielle Henriksen, Nebraska Hospital Association, Ann Ames, Independent Insurance Agents of Nebraska, Kelly Usen, Alan Thornton, Nebraska Medical Association, Michelle Wirely, Annie Hasselbach, Tanya Martin-Dick, Shauna McCarville, Laura Shablasky, Nebraska Cancer Coalition, Lynn Bostwick, Nebraska Nurses Association, and Sarah Virus. No opponents, neutral, Jeremiah Blake with Blue Cross Blue Shield, and Robert Bell with Nebraska Insurance Federation. It came out of committee unanimous. Let's see here, LB 383 as amended by AM 235. Okay. This change provisions relating to insurance coverage for screenings of colorectal cancer. The bill would amend section 44-7-201, a statute that deals with the insurance coverage requirements for colorectal cancer screening. The bill would provide specifically as follows. Amends 44-7-102 by changing the language in the statute that explains what type of colorectal cancer screenings are covered. Specifically, this section removes the fecal occult blood test language and replaces it with screenings that are covered under the statutes that include preventative screening tests as approved by the United States Preventive Service Task Force. For a minute, I was very confused until I realized I was talking about colorectal cancer because I was like, fecal occult blood test? What is that? Obviously, when you're talking about colorectal cancer, that makes more sense. Okay. Removed language in 44-7-102, which stated that the statute does not prevent the application of deductible or co-payment provisions contained in the policy, certificate, contract, or employee benefit plan, or require that such coverage be extended to any other procedures. Section 2 repeals the original section being mandated. AM 235 would amend LB 383 as follows. make a technical correction to the United States Preventative Services Task Force, adds a condition stating that the screening colonoscopies referred to in subsection 2 of the bill only includes those screening colonoscopies recommended by the United States Preventative Services Task Force, removes the condition that non-colonoscopy stool-based preventative screening tests be approved by the United States Preventative Services Task Force. Oral testimony, proponents, Senator Bostar, Alan Thorson, Nebraska Cancer Coalition, Nebraska Medical Association, Gina
1 minute.
Regland, thank you, AARP, and Lena Botswick, Nebraska Nurses Association. No opponents. Neutral, Robert Bell, Nebraska Insurance Federation. The bill came out unanimous. Okay, before I move to the next, so we've divided the question. Then we have this amendment to the first division of the question. And then there's some other pending amendments to this first division of the question. I think there's 2 other amendments pending, I believe. But first we have to vote on this amendment before we can go to the next amendments. And I did have a super priority IPP motion filed on this bill this morning, but I chose not to file it.
That's your time, Senator. You're next in the queue, and that'll be your 3rd time on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. I chose not to file the super priority IPP motion because I wanted to allow the committee amendments and this package to be attached to the bill, even though it is my intention to take the bill 8 hours, as I have previously stated. It's not my intention to kill the bill. And so, not that that would have killed it, but I know that there's a lot of work that has gone into the bill. And so I want to make sure that that work is honored and gets moved forward. So again, when we have the opportunity to do good things and to work together, I believe we should take those opportunities. And I'm trying to do that this morning by not filing my super priority IPP motion. I do still have an IPP motion and a bracket motion and a recommit motion, all pending, that I will use only if necessary to take time. That said, this is a bill that has a lot of bills in it that are important to a lot of people. And frankly, the more people talk about the substance of the bill, the less I will talk, and the less we will have to go to votes on things and motions to reconsider our votes, which will mean that people don't have to come scurrying back. I'm not asking people to help me filibuster bills, but if you want to talk about it, you shouldn't let the fact that I'm filibustering stop you from talking about it. I do tend to get out of the way when people are in the queue to talk about the substance of a bill that I am just filibustering. So I just put that out there to you, colleagues, that I'm going to take the time regardless. And I think we all saw yesterday that I can take the time by myself, and I'm fine with that. This has a lot of important things in it. And if you want to speak to that, if you want to build a record for why you're supporting this, you should do that. I have made a commitment to work in good faith on negotiating a path forward in this legislature. And this is me continuing to show that commitment. But I am also committed to maintaining a slower pace until there is some resolution. So that's where I'm at. And this is my last time on the mic on this particular motion. And so we'll go to a vote on this after there's, I think, one person in the queue now. Also, I will always take time if people want to yield me their time. I'm happy to do that as well. I will say the more times of speaking, the fewer times we have to vote on things, which for people that are off to the sides doing different committee work, that is a benefit to you all. So if you want to yield me your time, I will take it. Otherwise, I will just find my own creative ways to take more time, which I have many of. I just hate to force everybody to continually get up to vote on motions to reconsider if it's not necessary. So, okay, we are on, how much time do I have left?
1 minute, 20 seconds.
Okay, the next bill is LB 437, and this is change to renewal period for business entity licensed under the Insurance Producers Licensing Act. The bill amends section 44-4054 of the
1 minute.
Insurance, thank you, Insurance Producers Licensing Act to change the renewal period for the business entity licenses from annual to biennial. The bill specifically does as follows. Amends section 44-4054 to change the renewal period for business entity license issued under the act from April 30 of every year to April 30 of each even numbered year. States an operative date of April 30, 2024, repeals the original section as amended. And it had no opponents. Nebraska Association of Health Underwriters supported it. Nealon Strategy Group on behalf of Big I, Professional Insurance Agents of Nebraska, Department of Insurance, and Senator Ballard. I think I am just about out of time, so I will yield the remainder to the chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Raybold, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. Good morning, fellow Nebraskans out there watching on TV. I stand in support of LB 92 and certainly the amendment 1364. And I want to speak particularly to Senator Bostar's bill, LB 145, on relating changes and provisions relating to coverage for screening, mammography, and breast examinations. I think it's fair to say that probably everybody out there watching knows some family member that has had to deal with this and how important it is to do the screenings and breast examinations. And I am really happy to see that we are lowering the age from the age of 50 to 40, which is so incredibly important. And I just wanted to share one of the personal stories I have of some young person that I know. And I was very fortunate at many of the fundraising auctions. You bid on a silent auction item, and I actually won it and got a membership to Madonna Rehab and to work with a trainer for a number of sessions. And I met this wonderful young woman who was 20 at the time, and I continued to work with her because she was incredible. And so for 4 years, we worked together, and she was 24 at the time, and she mentioned to me that she found a lump in her breast. And I said, well, this is serious. You are only 24 years. Please, please, please get that lump checked out. And she was a little bit reluctant. And I said, please, I have a history of breast cancer in my family. You must get these things checked out right away. And tragically, unfortunately, it was cancerous. And this young woman who is the same age as my daughter, Clara, of 24, she had to go undergo a double mastectomy. She had to endure very aggressive radiation, chemotherapy, breast reconstruction. She had to have a port for a number of years after that. She also had to go through tamoxifen for an additional 5 years. And I can tell you that this young woman is such an advocate. I got to know her parents. We had fundraisers to help support all of her chemotherapy treatment. Madonna was phenomenal, allowing her to take time off work. She didn't miss a session. She was so amazing. And also, she was in tremendous physical shape. And I don't think everybody can say that. But the good news is, she recovered. She is cancer-free. She went on to marry the young man who stood by with her the entire time. And now they have 2 amazing little boys. And so I guess the whole gist of this is doing these type of legislation and preventative is how you save lives. And I encourage everyone out there, if you suspect a lump, get it checked out. Please get it checked out. You have family members who care so deeply about you and want you to be alive and well. And I can tell you, it is such joy. I went to the wedding, and I can tell you it was one of the most joyful weddings I have ever been to in my entire life. So thank you, Senator Bostar. Thank you, Senator Slama. This is really important, and I appreciate the hard work everyone has done to get this bill this far, and I hope we can get it across the finish line. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Raybold. Senator Riepe, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think all of you know that my background is in hospital administration, and I do support preventive medicine. The one concern that I have with both LB 145, LB 383, and LB 779 is simply more and more an encroachment of government into becoming a government healthcare system. And I think that this is the accountability of the healthcare organizations and not that of the government. So being a conservative as such, I do have concerns with this ever-growing position of the state of Nebraska trying to become a healthcare dictator, if you will. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Riepe. Senator Hunt, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. First, I just want to say that I appreciate Senator Riepe's thoughts on government dictating health care, and I encourage him to follow that logical train a little further. I would like to yield some time to Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, but first I wanted to share some thoughts about this bill. Breast cancer is a significant health concern for women worldwide, and Nebraska is no exception. In the United States, breast cancer is the second most common cancer diagnosed in women, and it is the second leading cause of cancer deaths among women. Regular breast cancer screening is crucial for early detection and successful treatment. Breast cancer screening can identify cancer in its early stages when it is most treatable and associated with better outcomes. Breast cancer is a significant health concern for women in Nebraska, with an estimated 1,200 new cases diagnosed each year. According to the Nebraska Cancer Registry, breast cancer is the most commonly diagnosed cancer in women in Nebraska, accounting for 29% of all cancer diagnoses in women. Breast cancer is the second leading cause of cancer deaths among women in Nebraska, with an estimated 240 deaths from breast cancer in 2021. Early detection of breast cancer is crucial for successful treatment and improved outcomes. Regular breast cancer screenings can detect cancer in its early stages when it's more treatable and associated with better outcomes. Breast cancer screening includes mammograms, clinical breast exams, and self-exams. Mammograms, as included in this amendment, are the most effective screening tool for detecting breast cancer early. A mammogram is an X-ray of the breast that can detect changes in the breast tissue that may indicate cancer. The American Cancer Society recommends that women start getting yearly mammograms at age 40, although some women at high risk of breast cancer may need to start earlier or have more frequent screenings. Clinical breast exams are performed by a healthcare provider during a routine physical exam. The provider will examine the breasts and underarms for any lumps or other changes that may indicate cancer. The American Cancer Society recommends that women in their 20s and 30s should have a clinical breast exam at least every 3 years, and women 40 and older should have a clinical breast exam yearly. Self-exams are also an important tool for women to detect any changes early, as Senator Raybold was talking about. A self-exam involves feeling the breasts for any lumps or other changes that may indicate cancer. The American Cancer Society recommends that women should be aware of how their breasts normally look and feel and report any changes to their healthcare provider right away. Breast cancer screenings can help detect cancer in its early stages, making it more treatable and associated with better outcomes. Regular breast cancer screenings can save lives by detecting breast cancer early. Despite the importance of breast cancer screenings, many women in Nebraska face barriers to accessing them. Some of the barriers to breast cancer screenings in Nebraska include lack of health insurance. Many women in Nebraska do not have health insurance, which can make it difficult for them to access breast cancer screenings. Transportation. Women who live in rural areas of Nebraska may have to travel long distances to access breast cancer screenings, which can be a barrier to accessing care. Cost. Even women with health insurance may face high out-of-pocket costs for breast cancer screenings, which can be a barrier to accessing care. Fear and discomfort. Some women may avoid breast cancer screenings because they are afraid of the results or uncomfortable with the procedure. Language barriers. Women who do not speak English as their primary language may face barriers accessing breast cancer screenings.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. If they cannot communicate effectively with their healthcare providers. I think there's a lot that we can do more of to address cancer screenings in Nebraska. I know this is a bill that Senator Sue Crawford worked on with her staff extensively over many years, and I'm happy that it's made its way into this package and that Senator Bostar has been able to hopefully possibly carry it across the finish line. So many bills that we work on here in the legislature take years and years and years and years to draft, to get right, to make sure that we're following best practices and standard of care, and also just to get the buy-in and support of members of the legislature. And this is a good example of a good bill that has gone through the tests, that's not being rushed, and that we know is going to help the people of Nebraska. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Hunt. Senator Dungan, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise again in favor of LB 92 and the amendments. I do appreciate hearing the concerns that some of our colleagues have regarding the overreach here, but I do want to reiterate again that I believe everything in this bill is representative of a lot of hard work and representative of compromise. And so I would yield the remainder of my time to Senator Bostar to maybe talk a little bit more about his portions of FA 56.
Senator Bostar, you have 4 minutes, 35 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Senator Dungan. Yeah, I understand that there were some concerns raised, which I honestly don't get. We, as a state, regulate insurance. Not all insurance, some of it's regulated at the federal level. But we, as a state, regulate the insurance for what is estimated to be the majority of Nebraskans. That doesn't mean that the state is providing insurance, but we do regulate it. And I think that there are some positions that we can all agree with when it comes to the regulation of insurance. Namely that overall, we want to have an insurance industry that helps people be healthy. We want people to have access to health care through the insurance industry. And we want health care to cost less. I actually don't know anyone that disagrees with any of those things. And so related to some of the bills that have been questioned as far as overreach, the bills in question accomplish those three things. Prevent Nebraskans from dying prematurely, increase access to health care, and lower health care costs for all Nebraskans. The costs associated with treating someone with cancer is extraordinary. If you catch it through screenings, prevention, healthcare costs a lot less. This is common sense. If you want healthcare to cost more, have a problem with these bills. If you want healthcare to cost less, you want to keep more Nebraskans alive, vote for them. Thank you.
Senator Raybold, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I want to thank Senator Reapy. I respect him tremendously. And as a business owner and a fiscal conservative, yeah, I do not want government mandating me to do things with our business. And I really appreciate his comment about government over regulation when it comes to healthcare decisions that families have to make. But I did want to just follow up what Senator Bostar has been commenting about. It's cost effective to do preventative medicine. From whatever diagnosis you have, the sooner you get your colonoscopy and they say, oh my gosh, you have polyps and they're precancerous, you want to get rid of them, folks. You want to get that done as soon as possible. And then you're on a nice regular cycle of getting more frequent colonoscopies, which everyone hates, but everyone needs to do what they can to make sure that they stay alive for their family members, they stay healthy, and most importantly, that we avoid excessive healthcare costs. We know healthcare costs are extraordinarily high. Prevention is the key. The other component about this is requiring insurance companies, when you have individuals that have the diagnosis of pre-cancer, that they get those additional screenings, and that, you know what, your healthcare company cannot deny covering payment for these type of preventative screenings that your medical physician, your medical provider says are essential for your well-being. And so that is the other element that I like about this, making sure that your health insurance company cannot wiggle out of denying coverage for this preventative procedure. And I speak from experience. I mentioned before that I have a history of breast cancer in my family and have had surgery and follow-up treatments with an oncologist. And it's only recently that the insurance companies have denied a certain preventative image screening necessary that has been done for the last 30 years. And it's amazing. These things are essential. Why? It reduces cost all across the board. And guess what? It keeps our family members alive. So that's why it's really fundamental that we support this type of legislation that's on the ball. They're doing the right things, and they're doing the right things for all Nebraskans. So thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Hunt, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have a couple other thoughts on this, but right now I want to yield my time to Senator Michaela Cavanaugh.
Senator Cavanaugh, 4-minute 50. Senator Hunt, I do not see Senator Cavanaugh on the floor.
Can I have the time?
You may.
Okay, thank you, Mr. President. We have seen a lot of media coverage in the last couple years around surprise medical billing. And Senator Moorfeld, a couple years, maybe last year, I don't know, what year are we on? He introduced a bill addressing that in a way that was really productive in Nebraska. And there are many areas in Nebraska law that are in need of an update around access to preventative care, ways that we can cut down on those surprise medical bills. And this amendment, this bill is one of those important things. All women who are over the age of 40 are recommended to have regular breast cancer screenings, and the Affordable Care Act provides that insurance coverage. Insurance must cover mammograms at no cost every 1 to 2 years for this age group of women over 40. An estimated 40% of women have dense breast tissue. For these women, traditional mammograms do not effectively screen for breast cancer. Breast density is a measure of the makeup of the breast, or refers to how the tissue appears in the mammogram, which often changes with age. Women with high breast density have a greater amount of breast and connective tissue compared to fat. Mammograms of dense breasts are harder to read than mammograms of fattier breasts because the dense breast tissue and cancers both show up as white on a standard mammogram. There is evidence that in women with dense breasts, standard mammograms miss more than 50% of the cancers present. This is why a higher level of screening technology is needed. Additionally, evidence shows that women with dense breasts are at a 4 to 5 times higher risk of breast cancer, further increasing the need for a more accurate picture of these women's breasts. Exams, such as supplemental MRIs, which have been demonstrated to be more effective at detecting cancer in women with dense tissue and result in as many as 50% fewer missed cancer diagnoses. The currently recommended gold standard screening modality for women with dense breasts is a digital breast tomosynthesis, known as a 3D mammogram, because it's more accurate than traditional mammograms, results in fewer misdiagnoses than a breast ultrasound, and is more cost-effective than an MRI. This bill would require that insurance companies cover 3D mammograms referred to in the bill language as digital breast tomosynthesis at no cost for women with dense breasts or who are at higher risk for cancer due to previous cancer diagnosis, immediate family members with breast cancer, or a positive genetic testing. This also requires coverage of MRIs for those groups, though it allows the application, let me see here. The intent of this type of thing, of bills that increase access to screening and increase access to health care, is not to remove other women's access to these screening services.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. But to ensure that the women at highest risk receive the coverage they need. The research has stressed the importance of more effective screening modalities for high-risk women and people with dense tissue. However, setting a statutory minimum does not legally prohibit coverage of free mammograms for all other women. Major insurers of the state have shared that they're already providing this service for women over 40. With this, we would just be setting a minimum standard for women that the medical literature indicates need those services the most. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Hansen, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just got pushed back a little bit on what Senator Bostar said, and I'm not going to totally devalue some of the concerns that Senator Riepe has. He has valid concerns about the involvement of government in healthcare, and then, you know, what's the outcome of that? I'm in favor of LB 92. I'm going to vote for it. But I think it begs, you know, to ask the question, how much government involvement in healthcare is too much? When it comes to costs, when it comes to outcomes, when it comes to the role of government in healthcare. And I think one of the things Senator Bostar was saying, which makes sense in some aspect, is that if we have more prevention, if we we force insurance companies to pay more for preventative measures, that will help healthcare costs, which I'm not going to deny. I think it will help healthcare costs for that individual, because if we are being preventative, if we find cancer earlier, I think in the long term that will help with costs for the individual. But I just want to make sure we all kind of think, does it actually help healthcare costs or insurance costs in the long run for everybody? And I don't think it does. I think the more rules, the more regulations, the more red tape you put on insurance companies and other industries only increase the costs over time. If you think about it, what are the industries or things we pay for that have exponentially increased over time? Healthcare, housing, insurance, college education, and what are the most over-regulated industries in America? Healthcare, housing, insurance. The TV you buy right now is pretty darn cheap when being compared to 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago. Technology is really cheap. It's not as overregulated and overburdened by government than some of these other industries are. I'm just putting it out there, kind of in the ether, that sometimes maybe we should think about the more we try to control certain industries or certain aspects of people's lives, the more it can cost in the long term. So, and I know others, maybe Senator Hunt, because we disagree on certain things, might kind of chomping at the bit to kind of turn this into a debate about abortion, but that's not where I'm going with this. That to me is more of a constitutionality question. And so I just hope we can kind of think about this whenever we pass bills such as these or in the future, that what will be the outcome, not just in the short term, which could benefit the individual, but what's the long-term cost of bills such as this in the long term, and will that cost us more? I have a feeling this will. I mean, I don't think this is going to decrease insurance cost rates. I don't see how it can, because eventually, if you think about free market economics, the insurance companies are probably eventually just going to increase their rates to pay for this. So I just want to kind of give my 2 cents on this. I'm still going to vote for the bill. I think it's a good bill overall, and I encourage others to as well. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Bostar, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Hansen, for your response to some of the things I said. So, yes, this will reduce healthcare costs overall, not just for the individuals that, unfortunately, through screening, would have detectable cancer. The reason being is because those individuals who end up developing cancer overwhelmingly have insurance. And those costs of treating individuals with cancer are borne by all of us that pay for insurance. So it isn't just an individualized benefit that we are providing. We are providing a benefit to everyone. The easiest way to, I think, represent that is that the insurance companies didn't oppose this. For those who spend any time in or around the Banking, Commerce, and Insurance Committee, mandates, increases in coverage, those kind of things tend to come with opposition from the insurance industry. This did not. The breast cancer provisions did not, the colorectal cancer provisions did not, the insulin provisions did not. Because when individuals, when Nebraskans are dealing with the effects of cancer, of the effects of not being able to get insulin supplied, we all pay for that. Not just the individual. We all have to pay for that because insurance has to pay for that. A lot of it. Now, granted, it's co-insurance, so it'll probably bankrupt the individual. But along the way, insurance costs for everyone will be higher. So if we can prevent these things, if we can screen for these things effectively, we can have lower cost healthcare, not just for them, but for us too. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Hansen, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I like debate. This is fun. As much as I like listening to Senator Kavanaugh, I mean, I sometimes like to, have some substantive discussion. And Senator Bostar is great at it too. He's a very intelligent person, so I appreciate his actually thoughts on a lot of this, and I do listen to him. Let me tell you why insurance companies probably didn't come out and oppose this. Optically, it probably doesn't look very good when you're going to come out and oppose mammograms for other people or other types of screening tests. And it looks like you're optically against women with breast cancer. I think it makes sense maybe why they didn't come out against it. What they're probably going to do without telling anybody is increase the rates. That's easy to do. Don't come out and oppose it. Optically, you look good. You're not looking like you're coming out opposed to something that everyone here is against. They'll just increase the rates. And from just the brief analytics I was looking at online, could be wrong, but so far it looks like mammogram rates have been going up in the state of Nebraska. If they've been going up in the state of Nebraska over time, how come insurance rates haven't gone down? We're being more preventive. Insurance rates keep going up. We keep imposing more government rules and regulations on these industries. Costs keep going up. So again, something to think about. And I don't want this to look like I'm against getting mammograms for any reason. I think everybody should. I think it's a personal responsibility that we should all take upon ourselves. I'm just pushing back a little bit on the notion that in the long run, this might decrease insurance costs and is best for everybody as a whole. So I know personally the cost of cancer. My father passed away when he was 46 from malignant melanoma. I really know the cost that it puts on a family. So all I'm saying is maybe now or in the future, we sometimes think about what should be our roles as a government when it comes to making certain industries do certain things, and then what is the long-term effects of that economically. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Conrad, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning again, colleagues. I had an opportunity to share some supportive statements in regards to particularly the breast cancer screening coverage and access to those new technologies and updating our healthcare and insurance policy to make sure we're meeting best practices in medicine at my first time in the mic, but wanted to spend a little extra time talking about the colorectal cancer components and the insulin components in this measure. Even though it's very tempting to get off track here after hearing a lot of dialogue this morning about the role of government in our healthcare, but I'll let that speak for itself. So when it comes to where we are with colorectal cancer in Nebraska, doing a little bit of research and preparation for the measure, there are some pretty shocking statistics out there which show that at least according to some metrics, that Nebraska has a very high rate when it comes to being what I found in the data that showed we were the 16th deadliest state when it came to colorectal cancer. And I was thinking about my good friend, Senator John Harms, who had carried forward some really important efforts in regards to our healthcare policy in terms of improving coverage and raising awareness about these issues in Nebraska so that more Nebraskans were aware of the services that were provided to access, detection, and treatment for colorectal cancer. And I really see this as perhaps a continuation of some of those existing or more recent efforts. The one thing that I was also thinking about in regards to this measure, much as we saw with Senator Wishart's measure earlier in the session, which changed some of our policies in regards to behavioral health care funding, was one important benefit of legislative floor debate is that it does help to raise awareness about these key issues that are facing Nebraska. So whether that's breast cancer or colorectal cancer, or ensuring the cost of insulin is more affordable from both a racial and economic justice perspective, I think it's critical that we utilize this time on the floor to not only build a record, but to help raise awareness. The other thing that I wanted to point out, in addition to the gender justice components of these measures, was also the racial justice components of these measures. When you drill down and you look at the statistics, you can see that there are existing and persistent health disparities that exist in Nebraska, sometimes much, much, much higher than even our sister states might see, and that each and every act that we can find to come together to improve access to testing and treatment helps save lives in Nebraska and helps to combat some of these very persistent and very real disparities that exist in our state. I also, was putting together some different information and research and saw that according to one statistic that I found, that Nebraska was 44th out of 50th when it came to early detection for breast cancer. So again, the more that we can do to improve anybody's access to early detection is going to save lives in this state. And when you look at the committee statements, you can see a very broad swath of support from
1 minute.
health. Thank you, Mr. President. From health advocates to insurance advocates to community advocates and to individual Nebraskans that came forward in regards to these measures. I also just wanted to make sure to give a shout out to the cancer care experts in Nebraska, including at UNMC. I think it is an absolute point of pride for our state that we have some of the brightest and most cutting edge minds working on cancer care in Nebraska. And that is widely recognized by our citizenry and an envy perhaps of our sister states in the nation. And so anything that we can do to lift up that incredible work, to provide more access to more Nebraskans for early detections and treatment, and to raise awareness about these critical issues facing the healthcare of our citizenry, the better. And I appreciate Senator Slama, Senator Bostars, and others work on these bills. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Slama, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. If you haven't heard enough from me this morning, you're about to hear a little bit more. So I do respect where Senator Hansen and Senator Reapy are coming from. I actually consider them really close friends, and I'm grateful for that. I do disagree with them on their take on Senator Bostar's parts of LB 92, and maybe it's a failure on my part to really explain where these bills are coming from, what the approach was, how thoughtful we were as a committee in moving these forward. I'll frame this with, I think I hate mandates more than anybody on this floor. If anybody wants to go to the mat with me on that, I'm willing to go there. So I didn't take adding Senator Bostar's pieces to this Christmas tree lightly. And here's why we did it. So first off, his insulin cap bill, all of the insurance companies we talked to were already providing it at no cost. So a $35 limit simply protects our diabetic Nebraskans from price spikes in a time of shortage. It's a wonderful bill. Really doesn't impact our insurance companies. His colorectal screening bill, you may have seen ads for Cologuard where you can get colorectal cancer screenings from the comfort of your home. In rural Nebraska, sometimes it's difficult to go to the doctor's office, take off of work, and make that time for a screening. So a lot of people just happen to forget. And those do-it-yourself from home tests can be a wonderful option for those who are low risk. And you can work that out with your doctor. This simply says that our insurance companies are going to cover that. That saves everybody money. That saves everybody money across the board. And that's why the insurance companies weren't lighting the world on fire about it. It's a great bill, especially for rural Nebraska. And when it comes to the high-risk mammographies for the dense breast tissue, you're right, that was a tough bill for me to include in this Christmas tree. But here's the thing, at the end of the day, when we're talking about costs to the state of Nebraska, we're seeing women who have the BRAC2 gene, which, if you aren't aware, gives you a very high risk for developing breast and ovarian cancers. And we heard from several young women who, when they found out they had that gene, they couldn't afford to get the advanced screening. So instead of getting those advanced dense breast tissue screenings, they got double mastectomies because they couldn't afford the screenings. So when we're talking about healthcare and costs on the front end, we're seeing young women choose to pass up screenings and eventually develop breast cancer at a very young age. get preventative mastectomies because they can't afford the tests, or just not being offered that option altogether and putting themselves at a much higher risk. So for me, all three of these components are very reasonable, and I'd invite anybody who thinks that the insurance industry worries about looks and coming in opposition to certain issues to come sit in on our insurance mandate day. They have absolutely no shame, and I'm sure Senator Bostar agrees with me here. They will oppose hearing aids for kids, middle class kids. They'd oppose the sky is blue if it was a government mandate. And I say that out of love. I mean, I respect that, absolutely. But if they don't like something, they will absolutely set the world on fire about it. These three things are very common sense bills, and I'm grateful to stand with Senator Bostar on these bills, and I hope I was able to provide a little bit more perspective on, thank you, Mr. President, on how this is actually impacting Nebraskans and our healthcare costs in the state of Nebraska, because when you look at it, maybe I framed it the wrong way, maybe we're approaching it the wrong way, but this is absolutely a conservative bill, and it will save Nebraskans money in the long haul. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Michaela Cavanaugh would like to welcome 86 fourth grade students from St. Vincent de Paul in Omaha. They're located in the north balcony. Students, if you would rise and be welcomed by your Nebraska legislature. Mr. Clerk, for some items.
Thank you, Mr. President. Amendments to be printed from Senator Raybould to LB 562. And notice that the Judiciary Committee will be meeting under the north balcony for an executive session, 11 o'clock. Judiciary, north balcony, 11 o'clock. That's all I have this time.
Senator Bostar, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. And thank you to Senator Slama for providing some of that context. So, yeah, I wanted to respond to a few things. Some of the thunder was stolen by Senator Slama. It is entertaining, I think, for those of us on the committee to imagine the insurance companies being apprehensive about showing up in opposition to certain healthcare coverage mandates. They do it frequently. I don't know whether or not they personally have any reticence about it, but it certainly doesn't seem that way. Granted, they're doing a job, right? And they're there for their industry. But I don't think optics are ever considered. There was some conversation about how we are adding regulations, adding rules, over-regulating. Okay, all of these things are already regulated. They're already fully regulated. Insulin cost and access is regulated. Breast cancer screenings, mammograms, fully regulated. Colorectal screenings, colonoscopies, regulated. Completely. We're not regulating something that wasn't regulated before. We're changing what the regulation is in order to improve our healthcare system. And if there's any real thought still remaining that, the insurance companies, they know that this is, that somehow this is bad and they just didn't want to be seen opposing it. They're in the rotunda. This is the insurance package. Trust me, they're all there. If you walk out there, just walk up to the first person you see. There's like an 85% chance that they represent an insurance company. Ask them. Ask them if they oppose these bills. When they tell you they don't, ask them if they secretly oppose these bills. When they tell you they don't, ask them if they super secretly oppose these bills. They will say they don't. We often have to consider and weigh options when we are examining healthcare regulations, insurance regulations. potential increases in costs with increases in coverage. That can be hard to do. This isn't one of those times. It just isn't. It's why there's no opposition. It's why the committee advanced it, or included it, I should say, into the committee bill 8-0. This is a win-win. Helps Nebraskans, reduces suffering, makes healthcare more affordable. And we know that improving access to screenings, prevention, lowers the cost of healthcare overall. That has been studied and studied and studied. We know this. It's not a secret. If anyone would like to see the reports on that, the journals on that, I would be happy to identify those and share them. But honestly, if anything, just for fun, go in the rotunda and ask the insurance companies what they actually think, what they really, really, really think about these bills. And I look forward to hearing back on the results of that endeavor. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Linehan would like to welcome 60 students from the 11th and 12th grade in Elkhorn High School. They are located in the north balcony. Students, if you would stand and be welcomed by your Nebraska Legislature. Senator Reapy, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I reemphasize that I, as a hospital administrator, I am supportive of preventive medicine. And in the long run, I don't know the definition of long run, but it is advantageous. I would also like to point out, if we have mandates for screening mammography and breast exams, we have screening mandates for colorectal examinations, and we have mandates for insulin, which is fundamentally an expansion of government into the medicine. Then why don't we have mandates over obesity? Why don't we have mandates over smoking? Why don't we have mandates over the use of alcohol if we're going to try to control all of those healthcare issues? I would also like to point out that recently, many of you may have seen in the Omaha World Herald, they're using now artificial intelligence to accompany colonoscopy examinations to better identify polyps. So is our next step then to require that they use artificial intelligence? And do we then dictate what other technology that has to be used in each and every one of these particular procedures? I would also like to say, in a response to where the insurance companies are at, quite frankly, any of us that have been in the business for a period of time understand insurance companies are going to simply take that added cost, if it is there, and they're going to pass it on to you, the premium holder. Believe me, they're not going to eat the cost out of their profits. So the hospital industry really has no dog in the fight, other than they may not like someone trying to tell them what they have to or have not to do. So I still think that my bottom line is ever encroaching government into government health care, into the form ultimately into national health insurance, which I think will be a big downfall with a lot of rationing in the country. And I think that I feel compelled to speak up, at least to bring attention to it. And thank you, Mr. President.
Seeing no one left in the queue, Senator Slama, you are welcome to close on AM 1364.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I am really grateful for the very thoughtful debate. It was very substantive, and I wholeheartedly appreciate it. I would just like to take a moment to thank everyone who had a role in this, from bill drafters to my wonderful committee members, Senator Jacobson, my vice chair, Senator Aguilar, Ballard, Bostar, Dungan, Kauth, and Von Gillerin, and my outstanding staff under the balcony, committee, Joshua Chrysler, my legal counsel, Natalie Shunk, committee clerk, Tori Osborne, my legislative aide, and absolutely last but not least, Sue Ellen Stutzman, who's my admin assistant who keeps all the trains moving somehow. Also, thank you to everybody who's held fire on procedural motions to ensure we can get to everything attached. I'd ask anybody who is looking at filing a procedural motion to maybe reconsider AM 1364, hold your fire. We've got another good amendment coming up. Senator McDonald's got an amendment, and I want to make sure we have the time for him to get that on and get it attached. Thank you, Mr. President. I'd encourage a green light vote on AM 1364.
Senators, the question before us is the motion AM 1364. All those in favor vote aye. Opposed, nay. Has everyone voted who wishes to vote? Mr. Clerk, please record.
29 ayes, no nays on adoption of the amendment.
AM 1364 is adopted. Mr. Clerk, next.
Next item, Mr. President, Senator McDonald will move to amend FA 56 with AM 1379.
Senator McDonald, you're welcome to open.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. I'd like to start off by thanking Senator Slama and Speaker Arch for working with me on this legislation and getting an opportunity to discuss it today in front of you. I stand before you today to introduce Amendment 1379, legislation that aims to secure prosperous future for our state, great state, by aligning our business incentives with creating a helpful incentives to produce semiconductors, chips for American Act. This amendment carries the main provisions of LB 616. The goal of this legislation is to give Nebraska-based applicants for federal investments the greatest chance of successful application with the United States Department of Commerce. It is worth noting that both LB 617 and LB 616 have received strong support in their respective committees. LB 617 was unanimously passed by the Banking Committee without any opposition, and LB 616 was also unanimously passed by the Revenue Committee without opposition. This demonstrates the broad consensus and support for this legislative efforts aimed at boosting Nebraska's semiconductor industry and economic development. The CHIPS Act presents an extraordinary opportunity in Nebraska to capitalize on the growing semiconductor industry. As you are aware, this industry is critical to the development of advanced technologies, many of which have direct applications in agriculture. By investing in the growth of the semiconductor industry in our state, we can ensure that Nebraska remains at the forefront of agricultural innovation. Amendment 1379 establishes a framework that enables Nebraska's based covered entities to access funding under the CHIPS for American Act by matching federal grants, loans, and other financial incentives. Nebraska will approve any Nebraska-based covered entity that meets the eligibility requirements under the CHIPS for American Act and has a total project cost exceeding $50 million. However, Amendment 1379 caps the total incentives awarded from the state and local sources at 25%, which is substantially lower than what they currently qualify for under Imagine Nebraska and local incentives. This cap was implemented at the request of the companies. At their primary objective is to find a state that will assist them in meeting the requirements of the CHIPS for American Act, which mandates that they become fully operational within 2 years of the approval. One of the key educational incentives that will be supported by this investment is Metro Community College's semiconductor technician degree pathway. This program will equip students with the necessary skills and knowledge to excel in the rapidly growing semiconductor industry, providing a solid foundation for successful careers in this high demand field. The average wage of these 2-year degrees is $84,000 per year. The economic impact of attracting 9 semiconductor manufacturers to Nebraska, as outlined in the executive summary prepared by the Department of Economics at UNO College of Business Administration, is as follows. A total investment of $5.5 billion in construction and operation of semiconductor manufacturing. Number 2, the creation of 4,700 high-paying and ongoing jobs in production facilities. 3, an increase of Nebraska's GDP by $2.7 billion and an addition of 17,000 plus jobs from the company's plans. An estimated 26,700 jobs and $2.72 billion increase in Nebraska's GDP from the construction alone. An annual addition of 172 million in tax revenue to state, county, and local coffers. We currently have 9 companies looking at Nebraska, and their presence in Nebraska would generate significant economic benefits, including job creation, investment, and overall growth. Amendment 1379 and the expansion of the semiconductor industry in Nebraska is crucial to the sustained prosperity of our agriculture and our urban sector. It is particularly important to pass this legislation at this time due to the $38 billion that the Commerce Department is distributing this year. We must demonstrate to companies considering Nebraska how our economic development incentives can be effectively employed, enabling them to leverage the maximum amount of private and public funds available. This is especially relevant as applicants are actively being sought now. For a company to even be eligible to apply, they must submit their plan and to train and hire economically disadvantaged communities, which includes African Americans, Latinos, Native Americans, and rural workers. This is why the community college component and the job training is so important to these companies. These bills which facilitate the growth and development of the semiconductor manufacturing industry in our state while ensuring we build generational wealth. Nebraska is in a unique position under the CHIPS Act as a bill was drafted at the federal level with the heartland in mind. A company only qualifies in a state that doesn't have semiconductor companies, and the costs have essentially been eliminated because of the average wage requirements, which the entire state of Nebraska qualifies for. You talk about what's going on in Washington, D.C. over the years, and you look at what happened in last July in 2022. You had a bipartisan effort saying that we have to step up based on our semiconductors. And you look everywhere in our society, we have the semiconductors in our phones, coffee maker, nuclear defense, everywhere we look, and how important that is to our country. We have an opportunity to create a runway for those companies to land here. They have shown interest. We have some competitors that are ahead of us, Kansas for one. But we are basically, how I've presented it before, it's a halftime of a football game. We are behind, but we have the other team's playbook. We know what they're doing. We have tools in our toolbox based on Imagine Nebraska, based on inland ports, an opportunity to actually utilize those tools at the same time with our education system here, with our Metro Community College, for example, and University of Nebraska at Omaha working together for these jobs. If UNO's numbers through the business school are accurate, even if they're half accurate, which I believe UNO does a great job and they are accurate, but even if they are half, this is generational, this change. And when we first discussed, we talked about the biggest economic impact to hit the state of Nebraska since corn. This is it. This is a game changer for the next couple generations. And we have an opportunity to be on the forefront of that. And basically what we need to do as the state of Nebraska, embrace these companies, let them land. The bottom line is though, we are last dollar in. If these companies do not come here, we spend nothing. If these companies do come here, and they set up shop here and they start hiring our people and we start training our people through community college and the university, we have actually given the next generation a clear path for success that they don't have as of today. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Merman would like to recognize Wes and Kathy Wilmot, who are visiting from Beaver City. They are located under the south balcony. Welcome. Senator Slama, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Our Banking, Commerce, and Insurance Committee Christmas tree included bills about banking and insurance. So Commerce felt a bit lonely. So when Senator McDonald asked if he could add LB 617, which has already been approved for funding by the Appropriations Committee, I wholeheartedly agreed. This was a great bill that came before our committee that includes commerce. So I'm grateful for him bringing that to me, and I'm excited to get LB 617 across the finish line to do, as he says, the best things for Nebraska since corn, I guess. But it's a very exciting opportunity, and it's a generational bill, and I'm grateful for it to be part of this Christmas tree. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Vargas, you are recognized.
Thank you very much. I rise in support of this amendment for two reasons. One, it's an important bill that will develop economic development in our state and will invest in key workforce needs. Also, as a co-sponsor, this is something that Senator McDonald and others in Appropriations Committee have worked on to make sure that it's represented within our budget. And it represents a really important initiative, not only for the caps that Senator McDonald represented and has already communicated, but the economic investment that is going to help to create high-paying, ongoing jobs in our production facilities, making sure we're empowering our education system to make sure that they are educating this pipeline and this workforce, and also creating the necessary landscape that will enable a company like Senator McDonald represented to be able to invest in a state like ours. This is leveraging the things that have been happening at the federal level with the CHIPS bill, and it's also making sure that we are doing our part as a state. Again, proud to be a co-sponsor, proud to be helpful in this initiative. Thankful for Senator McDonald, thankful for Senator Slama and others on the Banking Committee for also making this possible on this bill. And I urge your green vote on Amendment 1379. Thank you.
Seeing no one left in the queue, Senator McDonald, you are welcome to close on AM 1379. Senator McDonald waives close. Senators, the question before the body is the adoption of AM 1379. There has been a request to place the House under call. The question is, shall the House go under call? All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Mr. Clerk?
12 ayes, 4 nays, place House under call.
The House is under call. Senators, please record your presence. Those unexcused senators outside the chamber, please return to the chamber and record your presence. All unauthorized personnel, please leave the floor. The House is under call. All excused members are now present. Mr. Clerk, please call the roll.
Senator Aguilar. Voting yes, Senator Albright. Voting yes, Senator Arch. Voting yes, Senator Armendariz. Voting yes, Senator Ballard. Senator Blood. Voting yes, Senator Boston. Voting yes, Senator Bostar. Voting yes, Senator Bostelman. Voting yes, Senator Brandt. Voting yes, Senator Brewer. Voting yes, Senator Breezy. Voting yes, Senator John Kavanaugh. Voting yes, Senator Michaela Kavanaugh. Not voting, Senator Clements. Voting yes, Senator Conrad. Voting yes, Senator Day. Voting yes, Senator DeBoer. Not voting, Senator DeKay. Voting yes, Senator Dorn. Voting yes, Senator Dover. Senator Dungan. Voting yes, Senator Erdman. Voting yes, Senator Frederickson. Not voting, Senator Holleran. Voting yes, Senator Hansen. Senator Hardin. Voting yes, Senator Holcroft. Voting yes, Senator Hughes. Voting yes, Senator Hunt. Voting no, Senator Ibach. Voting yes, Senator Jacobson. Voting yes, Senator Kauth. Voting yes, Senator Linehan. Voting yes, Senator Lippincott. Voting yes, Senator Lowe. Voting yes, Senator McDonald. Voting yes, Senator McKinney. Voting yes, Senator Mosier. Voting yes, Senator Merman. Voting yes, Senator Raybold. Voting yes, Senator Reapy. Voting yes, Senator Sanders. Voting yes, Senator Slama. Voting yes, Senator Vargas. Voting yes, Senator Von Gillern. Voting yes, Senator Walls. Voting yes, Senator Wayne. Voting yes, Senator Wishart. Vote is 41 ayes, 1 nay, Mr. President, on adoption of the amendment.
AM 1379 is adopted. Senator Hughes would like to welcome members of the Seward County Leadership Group, the Rising Stars from Seward County. They are located in the North Balcony. If you would rise and be welcomed by your Nebraska Legislature. I raise the call. Mr. Clerk, next item.
Mr. President, next item, Senator Michaela Kavanaugh move to reconsider the vote just taken on AM 1379.
Senator Kavanaugh, you're recognized to open on your motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I got distracted. I don't think I talked on AM 1379 even once. And I gotta say, good maneuver sending over Senator Reapy to chat me up. Didn't even get in the queue. I see you, Senator Reapy. You're sneaky. He could have almost ended an 8-hour filibuster 2 hours in. But I caught wise to you. So he was sharing his favorite brownie recipe with me. Okay, LV 617 is the amendment 1379 that we just voted on. I am neither here nor there on it. Present not voting because you have to be present not voting to reconsider the vote. So just gonna take a look here at the fiscal note. Also, if anyone else has a favorite brownie recipe that they want to share with me, I do love brownies and I always like a good recipe. So, but I won't be distracted again. Okay. Let's see here. This is a 20 million revenue. So it says LB 617, I'm looking at the fiscal note, creates a $20 million a transfer of 20 million from the cash reserve fund to the economic development cash fund, and creates the economic development cash fund, sets the fund within the Department of Economic Development for administration, and prescribes fund use. The estimate of increased administrative burden provided by the Department of Economic Development appears reasonable. Okay, so let's see what their estimates are. This is from the Department of Economic Development. LB 617 creates the Economic Development Cash Fund, which assists community colleges in metropolitan cities grants to partner with four-year public universities in metropolitan cities to offer, quote, micro credentials, end quote, to meet market demand for microchip and microelectronic manufacturing in conjunction with the Federal CHIPS Act, and it's capital CHIPS. The Economic Development Cash Fund is to be funded by a $20 million transfer from the Cash Reserve Fund. However, the bill does not appear to appropriate funds from the new cash fund to the DED to create the grant program. Were funds appropriated to DED, LB 617 would require the services of one full-time employee or one FTE of an economic development business consultant to create and manage the grant program. DED expects the costs, including PSL, would be $147,010 and $142,920 in FY23-24 and FY24-25, respectively. Operating and costs include software licenses for the grant management software and additional leased space for staff. Okay, so that is the Department of Economic Development's fiscal note. Then there's the university system. They have nothing down there. The state college systems have nothing. So they are not anticipating that it costs them anything. Summary in the committee statement on LB 617. Let's see here, testifiers. Proponents, Senator McDonald, Thomas Goldberg, Randy Schmausel with the community colleges, and Brian Sloan with the state chamber. LB 617 is a bill that provides funding to the Department of Economic Development to provide for economic development in the area of microchip fabrication and electronics manufacturing in Nebraska. The bill would provide section by section as follows. Section 1 amends Section 84-612 by adding a subsection requiring the state treasurer to transfer $20 million from the Cash Reserve Fund to the Economic Development Cash Fund on or after July 15, 2023, or as soon thereafter as administratively possible, and in such amounts as directed by the budget administrator of the Budget Division of the Department of Administrative Services. Section 2 creates a new section that creates the Economic Development Cash Fund. It also requires that the DED administer the fund. Such administration includes providing grants to qualifying educational institutions in order to offer micro-credentials to support education, expansion, curricula development, and staff hires to meet demand for microchip fabrication and microelectronics manufacturing in Nebraska. It also states that the fund shall include money transferred by the legislature and gifts, grants, or bequests from any source, including money remitted to the fund from any other federal, state, public, and private sources. It also states that money in the fund available for investment shall be invested by the state investment officer pursuant to Nebraska Capital Expansion Act and the Nebraska State Funds Investment Act. Section 3 repeals the original section being amended. Section 4 is an emergency provision. Okay, so this is testimony from the hearing on LB 617. How much time do I have left, Mr. President?
3:30.
Thank you. Okay, so testimony LB 617. Oh, this is Senator McDonald's opening testimony. Okay. Thank you, Chairperson Slama and members of the Banking Committee for the hearing today. My name is Mike McDonald, representing Legislative District 5. I'm here today to introduce LB 617, which is Nebraska's workforce development component related to the Federal CHIPS for America Act. The Creating Helpful Incentives to Help Produce Semiconductors in Science Act of 2022, or CHIPS Act, was passed in July of 2022 and signed into law in August of 2022. This landmark bipartisan legislation creates an immense opportunity for Nebraska, a chance to make the Silicon Prairie a real thing. LB 617 and its companion bill, LB 616, enable Nebraska's Department of Economic Development to match any federal funds awarded through the Bipartisan CHIPS Act of 2022 to a semiconductor manufacturing company located within the state. These bills align to our current economic development policy to better demonstrate to the United States Department of Commerce and semiconductor manufacturers that Nebraska is an engaged and willing partner in securing a domestic supply chain of semiconductors and microprocessor components. I've handed out 2 articles that help demonstrate the opportunity Nebraska has in helping the United States secure our manufacturing future. LB 617 establishes the Economic Development Cash Fund within the Nebraska Department of Economic Development and provides a transfer of $20 million from the cash reserve to allow Metropolitan Community College to take the leadership role in providing education expansion and curricula development to meet the local requirements for microchip fabrication and microelectronics manufacturing needed for a Nebraska-based entity applying to the Department of Commerce to qualify as a covered entity under the U.S. CHIPS for America Act. This legislation ensures that semiconductor manufacturers locating in Nebraska can include the required commitment from a regional educational institution to provide workforce training, including the programming for training and job placement for economically disadvantaged individuals as part of their application.
1 minute.
Thank you. Since I started working on this legislation over the summer, we have heard from a large number of companies interested in locating their domestic production in Nebraska. Should this legislation be passed? We provided information from 9 of the companies who were the most interested and the furthest along in their plans to UNO's College of Business to do an economic impact study. I have handed the executive summary of that study out to this committee. The results of the study are jaw-dropping. So I'm next in the queue, and then I have another time after that. I have just 2 more times in the queue and then a close. If anybody would like to yield me time, be great. I'd very much appreciate it because I don't know what's after this, and I need to figure that out before. I'd like to figure that out over lunch before we go to whatever's next. So if anybody wants to yield me time so that we can take this
Time,
piece.
Senator.
Thank you.
You are next in the queue. You're recognized to speak.
Thank you. So that we can take this piece up to lunch so that I can make sure that I have my ducks in a row, as it were. Okay, so where was I? The results of the study are jaw-dropping. The economic analysis predicts that the plans of these 9 companies will increase Nebraska's GDP by $2.71 billion, create 17,402 jobs, and adds $172 million in annual tax revenues. In addition to this, the report estimated 26,789 jobs and $2.07 billion increase in Nebraska's GDP from the construction alone. We also know of a number of companies that are critical to the semiconductor supply chain that are planning on following these companies to wherever they end up locating. As we all know, and this committee is well aware, we need to grow the state in order to lower the overall tax burden felt by Nebraska families. The CHIPS for America Act is a once-in-a-generation opportunity for us to do just that. The semiconductor industry is a core component of America's economic future and national security. You will hear testimony about how this bill was drafted at the federal level with the heartland in mind. This is because we are best prepared to do this work, meet the eligibility guidelines, and build this economy. Both of these bills were drafted to put Nebraska at the head of the pack of the states currently competing for this industry. We are doing this by fully aligning our vast economic development tools to best support a company's application with the Department of Commerce. In order to be eligible under CHIPS for America Act, companies are required to demonstrate financial support from state and local governments in addition to their private sector financing. Our legislation is deliberately structured so that semiconductor companies can maximize their chances of federal approval by having Nebraska as their partner. Moreover, it is required that applicants guarantee workers in neglected communities obtain equal employment and training opportunities for semiconductor jobs. This includes rural workers. Consequently, states with fewer semiconductor companies, like Nebraska, are offered a notable advantage under the outlined eligibility criteria when submitting an application to the Department of Commerce. If this proposed legislation passes, Nebraska will experience its most profitable and advantageous economic opportunity since corn. Also, Nebraska's investment would be the last dollar in, so both federal approval and the private financing required would have to be secured before any financial investment by the state. Here to testify in support is Mr. Thomas Goldberg, who was one of the principal drafters of the U.S. CHIPS for America Act. Mr. Goldberg serves as a member of the National Security Council staff under President Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. He's our subject matter expert on this legislation and is helping us make sure that we all have the information we need to best align our investments to position Nebraska as a leading partner in building the domestic semiconductor industry. Also here to testify is Randy Schmazel, who is the president of Metropolitan Community College. Randy will talk about the workforce training needs of a semiconductor industry and potential programming that they would put together. It should be noted that while there is a requirement for eligible companies to make significant investments into research-based educational components as well, 90% of the jobs that would be created under this bill are anticipated, to only require 2-year technical degrees. I would thank you for your time. Happy to answer any of your questions. That is my dramatic reading of Senator McDonald's introduction of LB 617. Senator McDonald has a very distinct and booming voice. I wonder how our two readings of this same document would be side by side. An interesting comparison, probably, or maybe not. Maybe it'd be a very boring comparison. Okay, so I have one more time and then I have my closing, but I have much more I can talk about. If anybody would like to yield me time, I am here to take it. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Hunt, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I came by my opposition to Senator McDonald's amendment honestly. For one thing, I think it has problems from a single subject perspective, but I am also just against what it does, frankly, and the way it could impact our general fund. This amendment provides for grants in addition to Imagine Nebraska tax credits and allows for the tax credits received under Imagine Nebraska to be used to, quote, obtain a payment from the state equal to the amount which the taxpayer demonstrates to the director was paid by the taxpayer after the date of the complete application to repay the principal or interest on revenue bonds issued by an inland port authority. So if they use their Imagine Nebraska credits to pay for infrastructure bonds, they get a grant equal to that payment. This amendment also requires the state to match any federal loan or grant money we get toward one of these CHIPS projects up to 25% of the total project costs. The Federal CHIPS Act provides no cap on incentives. It's at the discretion of the Department of Commerce on a case-by-case basis. And the problem with determining a cost is that there are a lot of unknowns regarding the CHIPS Act. There's no funding formula or prescribed funding distribution under the Act. An eligible entity is defined, and then discretion is given to the Department of Commerce in what will be awarded. I'm told that chip manufacturing plants can cost anywhere from $1 to $10 billion. So say there's a $1 billion plant. Let's say it's a small one that's a $1 billion plant that wants to come to Nebraska. Let's say the feds are generous and they cover 50% of the cost of that plant through a loan. Under this amendment, the state has to match that federal funding up to 25% of the total cost. So we could be on the hook for $250 million. And some of that can come from Imagine Nebraska Act funds, but there's a limit on those funds as well. So under this amendment, we could be left with a huge drain on our general fund for some of these plants. That's basically my opposition to it. It's special legislation. I think it costs too much to the state, and I'll yield the remainder of my time to Senator Michaela Cavanaugh.
Senator Cavanaugh, 2 minutes 35.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Hunt. I've heard that term special legislation a few times this year, and kind of want to dig into that concept a little bit more, but maybe after lunch. So I'm just looking through here. I will say I probably will remain present, not voting on all of this, but I appreciate Senator Hunt's comments on special legislation and the commitments that we're making to the state. It does seem like we're doing a lot of things that are benefiting corporations. And yesterday I spent, I would say, not an insignificant amount of time talking about TANF. And I think that there's the biggest obstacle to moving forward TANF legislation is the cost. And so I do get concerned about moving forward legislation that has large fiscal notes without really a lot of conversation around that. So, yeah, it does feel like we are willing to move things quickly that have a fiscal impact if they benefit corporations, but we have to fight tooth and nail for anything that has a direct financial impact on the citizens of Nebraska. And that does concern me. That concerns me significantly. So I just have articles to read here on this bill. And I mean, to be honest, it's not really, it's mostly things like in favor, but of the bill, which I'm neither in favor or in opposition. This came up, this morning, and I had not really prepared for it. So and there's a lot of bills, and there's a lot of things to know about all the time on a lot of bills. And yes, this was on the agenda yesterday. But
Time, Senator.
Thank you.
You're recognized to speak, Senator Kavanaugh, and this is your last opportunity before your close.
Thank you, Mr. President. So as I was saying, this was on the agenda yesterday, but I was busy yesterday talking on other things that were on the agenda. And so I didn't have the time yet. So I'm just kind of catching up on what this bill is and what it does. So I'm just really reading things, documents, testimony that might be in support of the bill itself, but I want that to no way confuse the body that I have taken a position on this. I'm just reading it because it is germane to the conversation, and I'm attempting to stay germane to the conversation. So that's it. That caveat, LB 617 is a bill that provides funding. This is a summary. It's a bill that provides funding to the Economic Development, DED, the Department of Economic Development, to provide for economic development in the area of microchip fabrication and microelectronics manufacturing in Nebraska. The bill will provide section by section as follows. Section 1 amends Section 84-612 by adding a subsection requiring the state treasurer to transfer $20 million from the cash reserve fund to the Economic Development Cash Fund on or after July 15, 2023, or as soon thereafter as administratively possible, and in such amounts as directed by the budget administrator of the Budget Division of the Department of Administrative Services. Section 2 creates a new section that creates an Economic Development Cash Fund. It also requires that the DED administer the fund. Such administration includes providing grants to qualifying educational institutions in order to offer micro-credentials to support education expansion, curricula development, and staff hires to meet demand for microchip fabrication and microelectronics manufacturing in Nebraska. It also states that the fund shall include money transferred by the legislature and gifts, grants, or bequests for any source, including money remitted to the fund from any other federal, state, public, or private sources. It also states that any money in the fund available for investment shall be invested by the state investment officer pursuant to the Nebraska Capital Expansion Act and the Nebraska State Funds Investment Act. Okay. So here is the testimony from the state chamber. Okay. Again, if anybody wants to give me time, I'm happy to take it. Otherwise, I think we'll probably get to a vote on this motion before we go to lunch. Okay. Chairwoman Slama, members of the Banking, Commerce, and Insurance Committee. I am Brian Sloan, President of the Nebraska Chamber of Commerce and Industry. I'm here today to testify in support of LB 617 on behalf of the State Chamber, the Greater Omaha Chamber, and the Lincoln Chamber of Commerce. At the beginning of my business career in the 1980s, the United States led the world in technology, innovation, and microchip design and production, but that global advantage decreased by nearly 2/3 over the years since. When Congress passed the CHIPS and Science Act last year, it took a much-needed strategic step to invest in our economic future by boosting microchip production in the United States. The investment will secure critical supply chains for our industries, increase domestic research and development, and address important national security concerns. Specifically, the federal legislation authorized federal funding.
1 minute.
Thank you, to accelerate strategic technologies and advance manufacturing in the United States. It also authorized federal resources to create 20 new research and development technology hubs in the United States. Many states already actively engaged in leveraging the Federal CHIPS Act to grow their technology ecosystem and thereby grow their economic base and success for the years to come. The same kind of effort fits within Nebraska's economic future and strategies. In 2019, the Blueprint Nebraska report set forth a comprehensive strategy for economic, workforce, and community development in Nebraska through 2030. Out of the 15 strategic initiatives in that report, 2 of those initiatives incorporated building innovation hubs and making Nebraska an advanced manufacturing center of excellence. By the end of the decade, Nebraska needs to be a technology state to continue to compete for talent.
Time, Senator.
Thank you.
Senator McDonald, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I apologize, I stepped outside to answer some questions, and I believe one of those questions was also brought up in here. With the amendment, I just want to make sure it's clear what we're trying to do is currently with Imagine Nebraska, that some of us were here in 2019 when we passed Imagine Nebraska, are the inland ports and the ability to bond. If one of these semiconductor companies come here today without this legislation, they can take advantage of those incentives that are in place. What we are doing is making sure now on the education side, it is different. That's in the mainline budget for training people. In 23, 24 would be 5 million available, and 24, 25 would be 15 million. So that is different. But with this, what we're doing right now is we're not adding to the incentives. We're saying that if we have legislation in place, going back to what the federal government did in the bipartisan legislation in July of 2022, we're saying we are giving them a landing strip here in Nebraska, and what's already in the toolbox is Imagine Nebraska and is the inland ports, but we're not adding to it. So we're not giving them any special. We're going to make sure we have that very clear in the amendment if we move on to select at that time. But yeah, again, trying to make sure everyone understands, if a company moved here today and they were going to talk about manufacturing semiconductors without this legislation, they could apply for Imagine Nebraska and they could look at the inland port. But what we're trying to do is say, if you come here on top of that, because of what the CHIPS for American Act, you can apply for that also. So that's what we're adding, their ability to apply for the federal government. Also, we are last dollar in. Unless they receive that, they go through their application and they receive that dollar Again, we talked about earlier, $53 billion, and they want to invest 33 of those $1 billion before the end of this year and then hold 20 billion approximately for the next 4 years. Unless they have that agreement based on the federal government, we never spend a dime. If they do get that and they move here, that's when we start training people, and that's when they can also take advantage, of course, like they can today, of Imagine Nebraska or the inland ports. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Hunt, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll yield my time to Senator Michaela Kavanaugh.
Senator Kavanaugh, 4 minutes 50.
Thank you, Senator Hunt. So I was reading Brian Sloan's testimony, and I just internally, I'm just going to share with everyone. So it's in all caps, and I've been reading it in a very soft voice, but part of me wants to read it like you're yelling because it's all caps, like, I am Brian Sloan, President of the Nebraska Chamber. But I mean, that would be entertaining if I read this entire thing as though I was reading it in all caps, but I think I'll just finish reading it regular. Okay, so where was I on it? LB 617 is an important step to begin. Now I really do want to read it like I'm yelling. Be very aggressive in my tone. LB 617 is an important step to begin that process by establishing the Economic Development Cash Fund within the Department of Economic Development to provide funding to educational institutions to train the workforce. I'm trying to step away from the microphone. To train the workforce. Lost my place. Necessary to compete for microchip production and related research and development in Nebraska. For some reason, I need to use my fists while I am doing this. Nebraska is uniquely positioned to attract a major economic project related to microchip production in conjunction with the CHIPS Act. Our natural resources, affordable energy costs, and central location and transportation infrastructure are all competitive advantages. Our cost of living and quality of life regularly place us as one of the best places to work and live. The quality of our educational institutions is also a competitive advantage. Thus, this legislation would help them to be successfully engaged in providing the specialized workforce training to make any larger economic development investment in this space successful and a driver of significant economic returns for the state. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today as I ask the committee to support LB 617. That is my interpretation of an all caps reading. Okay, what else do we got here? This is Mr. Thomas Goldberg's testimony in support of 617. This is also in all caps. You know, this is fascinating. It's not a typical way to type. And actually, I think the laptops that we have provided here do not have like a button. Do they have an all caps button? I feel like I am always having to hold down the shift bar whenever I capitalize something. But I mean, you can format something to be all caps. Like in Google Docs, you can like select all and then you can just change it. You can type it regularly and then just change it to all caps. And maybe these individuals prefer reading things in all caps, but it's not a particularly large font. So the font point isn't like large and in all caps, which I could understand if it was for me to read, it would be like in 15 to 20 point font because I've got old eyes, and this place ages my eyes every day a little bit more. But anyways, this is from Thomas Goldberg, Vice President for Strategy at Nantero, and in a prior incarnation was one of the principal subject matter experts that drafted the authorization legislation known as CHIPS for America Act. I first was about to read in a prior incarnation as a prior incarceration. I was like,
Time, Senator.
all right, thank you.
Mr. Clerk.
Mr. President, thank you. Your Committee on Enrollment and Review reports Legislative Bill 574 and 753 is placed on final reading. In addition, Enrollment and Review reports Legislative Bill 565 to select file with amendments, 565A to select file, 626 to select file with amendments, and 753A to select file. In addition, new A bill, LB 138A, introduced by Senator Bosson. It's a bill for an act relating to appropriations to appropriate funds to carry out the provisions of Legislative Bill 138, 108th Legislature, first session 2023, and declare an emergency. An announcement that the Executive Board will meet at noon in room 1525. And finally, priority motion, Senator DK would move to recess until 1:00 p.m.
Senators, you've heard the motion to recess until 1 o'clock. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed say nay. We are recessed.